The House on Haunted Hill. Man, I gotta tell you about this crazy shit that happened to me and my buddies last Halloween. We're all seniors at Eastwood High, and every year we go all out for Halloween, pulling some kind of prank or trying to scare the crap out of each other. This year things went way too far. It all started a couple weeks before Halloween. We were all hanging out after school like always, bullshitting about what we were gonna do to top last year's haunted school basement. That's when my buddy Jake pipes up about this abandoned house up on Haunted Hill on the edge of town. You've probably heard the stories about that place. Supposedly this rich dude went crazy and murdered his whole family there like 60 years ago. Town tried to tear it down, but anyone that went in ended up dead or messed up in the head. So it's just been sitting there all creepy and overgrown as this big old reminder that some fucked up shit went down. Jake says we gotta go there and stay overnight on Halloween, that it'll be way sicker than any lame prank we could pull at school. At first I thought he was just talking shit to get a rise out of us, but the more he went on about it, the more I realized he was dead serious. And you know what? The idea started to sound pretty badass. I could see it in the other guys' eyes too. They were getting psyched about doing this insane sleepover in the haunted house. We were seniors, baby. Time to be legends. So we start planning and getting all the gear together. Sleeping bags, tents, tons of food, flashlights and batteries, anything else we might need to really make a night of it. Jake even ordered a couple of these handheld cameras that were supposed to be able to pick up paranormal activity and other weird shit just in case. As Halloween got closer, I gotta admit I was getting pretty freaked myself, but no way I was gonna be the pussy that backed down. Finally, Halloween night rolled around. We went as a group in Jake's older brother's pickup truck, parked out on the old dirt road about a half-mile away. Didn't want to risk leaving any vehicles too close. Then we grabbed our gear and started hiking through the dark woods toward the light on the hill where the house sat. As soon as we got our first look at the place, you could hear everybody's breath crunch in their throat. Pretty sure I sharped myself a little bit too. This goddamn mansion looked even more rundown and creepy than the stories let on. Burned out holes for windows, entire walls missing in spots, trees growing up through the wraparound porch. Just an absolutely derelict and deranged wreck of a place. But we'd come too far to turn back now. Steeled our nerves and headed around the side to what looked like it used to be the servants' entrance. Luckily, the door was blocked open, although the frame was all scratched up, like something had tried ripping its way out. We clicked on our flashlights and went inside single file. Oh man, you guys, I shit you not, the inside of that place was even more insane than the outside. Every inch was just coated in filthy cobwebs and dust. All the furniture was smashed up and turned over, rotting curtains in shreds. And the further we went, the worse it got. Big streaks of dried blood leading up the main staircase, creepy graffiti and weird symbols painted everywhere. Someone had definitely been squatting in this place, doing some messed up rituals and Satan shit or something. We were all pretty much pants shittingly terrified at this point, but you know, teenage bravado and peer pressure couldn't let on that you were the biggest pussy. So we went up the busted, creaky staircase to put our camp together on the second floor, set up our tents, got out our food and drinks, all trying to act tougher than we felt. Just as we started to get settled in though, that's when it started. These noises, man, like something big was moving around downstairs, bumping into furniture and rattling doors. Everyone froze up and looked around with pure terror in their eyes. Then we heard what sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs toward us. Slap, 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 getting closer. We turned our flashlights toward the stairwell just as this thing came into view. I ain't kidding, guys. It looked like a half-rotten corpse, all slimy and pale with chunks of flesh hanging on. It had these wild eyes and was snarling like an animal as it scrambled up the steps on all. The House on Haunted Hill. Man, I gotta tell you about this crazy shit that happened to me and my buddies last Halloween. We're all seniors at Eastwood High, and every year we go all out for Halloween, pulling some kind of prank or trying to scare the crap out of each other. This year things went way too far. It all started a couple weeks before Halloween. We were all hanging out after school like always, bullshitting about what we were gonna do to top last year's haunted school basement. That's when my buddy Jake pipes up about this abandoned house up on Haunted Hill on the edge of town. You've probably heard the stories about that place. Supposedly this rich dude went crazy and murdered his whole family there like 60 years ago. Town tried to tear it down, but anyone that went in ended up dead or messed up in the head. So it's just been sitting there all creepy and overgrown as this big old reminder that some fucked up shit went down. Jake says we gotta go there and stay overnight on Halloween, that it'll be way sicker than any lame prank we could pull at school. At first I thought he was just talking shit to get a rise out of us, but the more he went on about it, the more I realized he was dead serious. And you know what? The idea started to sound pretty badass. I could see it in the other guys' eyes too. They were getting psyched about doing this insane sleepover in the haunted house. We were seniors, baby. Time to be legends. So we start planning and getting all the gear together. Sleeping bags, tents, tons of food, flashlights and batteries, anything else we might need to really make a night of it. Jake even ordered a couple of these handheld cameras that were supposed to be able to pick up paranormal activity and other weird shit just in case. As Halloween got closer, I gotta admit I was getting pretty freaked myself, but no way I was gonna be the pussy that backed out. Finally, Halloween night rolled around. We went as a group in Jake's older brother's pickup truck, parked out on the old dirt road about a half-mile away. Didn't want to risk leaving any vehicles too close. Then we grabbed our gear and started hiking through the dark woods toward the light on the hill where the house sat. As soon as we got our first look at the place, you could hear everybody's breath crunch in their throat. Pretty sure I sharped myself a little bit too. This goddamn mansion looked even more rundown and creepy than the stories let on. Burnout holes for windows, entire walls missing in spots, trees growing up through the wraparound porch. Just an absolutely derelict and deranged wreck of a place. But we'd come too far to turn back now. Steeled our nerves and headed around the side to what looked like it used to be the servants' entrance. Luckily, the door was blocked open, although the frame was all scratched up, like something had tried ripping its way out. We clicked on our flashlights and went inside single file. Oh man, you guys, I shit you not, the inside of that place was even more insane than the outside. Every inch was just coated in filthy cobwebs and dust. All the furniture was smashed up and turned over, rotting curtains in shreds. And the further we went, the worse it got. Big streaks of dried blood leading up the main staircase, creepy graffiti and weird symbols painted everywhere. Someone had definitely been squatting in this place, doing some messed up rituals and Satan shit or something. We were all pretty much pants-shittingly terrified at this point, but you know teenage bravado and peer pressure. Couldn't let on that you were the biggest pussy. So we went up the busted, creaky staircase to put our camp together on the second floor. Set up our tents, got out our food and drinks, all trying to act tougher than we felt. Just as we started to get settled in though, that's when it started. These noises, man, like something big was moving around downstairs, bumping into furniture and rattling doors. Everyone froze up and looked around with pure terror in their eyes. Then we heard what sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs toward us. Slap, 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 getting closer. We turned our flashlights toward the stairwell just as this thing came into view. I ain't kidding, guys. It looked like a half-rotten corpse, all slimy and pale with chunks of flesh hanging off. It had these wild eyes and was snarling like an animal as it scrambled up the steps on all. The sinister serpent. Alright, listen up and let me lay some crazy shit on you that's gonna make your hair stand on end. This creepy-ass tale started a few months back when my idiot buddy Drake decided it would be a brilliant idea to get himself one of those huge-ass snakes as a pet. I told that moron he was insane. Those things are stone-cold killers who don't give two craps about no human owners. But Drake's got more muscle than brains in that thick skull of his, and once an idea gets jammed in there, almost nothing can shake it loose. Next thing I know, he's dragging this ginormous 15-foot-long Burmese python into his dinky apartment. The slimy, scaly thing was thicker than both my arms put together and strong as an oxy-fueled bodybuilder. Those cold, lifeless eyes sent a chill down my spine the second it slid out of that crate. Pretty sweet, ain't she? Drake grinned at me with that stupid shit-eating grin of his. Her name's Sabrina, and she's gonna be my new best friend. I shook my head watching him struggle to wrangle the powerful serpent into this janky-ass custom glass terrarium he'd set up in his living room. Drake was risking his fool life messing with a killer like that, but he didn't want to hear it. I left before Sabrina decided to go caw on his dumbass. For a while, things were pretty uneventful. Drake would come by and show off Sabrina, feeding her these massively gross frozen rats and rabbits every couple of weeks. She'd slowly crush them into mush with those powerful coil muscles until they looked like haggis filling a meat casing, then unhinge her jaws and slurp up the remains in one disgusting gulp. Sadistic little freak was obsessed with watching her eat. Drake kept bragging that Sabrina loved him and saw him as her bestie, since she hadn't tried offing him yet, which is just straight delusion. Those snakes may be stone-cold killers without remorse, but they're not dummies neither. They know better than to bite the hand that feeds, at least at first. That's why I wasn't exactly surprised when Sabrina's behavior started going off the rails a couple months later. Drake calls me up all pissed and frazzled, talking about how she barely touched her last meal. I'm thinking, yeah, dumbass. She's probably just started sizing you up to be her next meal. But there was worse things brewing up in that snake's sick mind. See, Sabrina started getting really antsy and thrashing around her crappy little tank as the days went by. Drake was too busy inhaling face insects to clue into the warning signs of what was coming. No, not until his next girlfriend Amber came over for a visit. Now this chick Amber was a straight-up smoke show, blonde bombshell with a body built for strutting around in slow-mo on the beach. The kind of girl that even made me have to pick my eyes back up off the floor when she sashayed into a room. She had zero business messing with a guttermouth loser like Drake, unless she was hard up for some green and didn't mind sharing the wealth with an entire football team's worth of deadbeat dudes. So there's Drake, already a few brews deep, making a mess of trying to impress this stellar beauty queen way out of his league. Amber's rolling her eyes at his feeble attempt at charms when something catches her attention over by the python terrarium. That's when she lets out the most blood-curdling shriek that probably ruptured both their damn eardrums. Drake and I spin around just in time to see the entire 15-foot length of Sabrina pressed up against the glass, tongue flicking in and out like a goddamn satanic crazy straw. And the way she was coiled, you could clearly see the massive tent pole of arousal sprung up under her scaly belly. Drake had definitely been keeping his precious pet way too pinned up for way too long. She wanted out, and Amber's pulchritudinous pheromones had awoken something primal and profane that couldn't be satisfied with no measly rabbits or rats. Jesus, Drake, get that thing away from me. Amber flipped, jumping back looking like she was gonna vomit. Keep that freaky snake away from me, or I swear to God. But old Drake was too busy gawking slack-jawed at Sabrina's throbbing display of animal lust. D-Dude had a look of pure rapture on his face, like the second coming of Steve Irwin was happening in front of him. Made me want to hurl just watching him drink in every disturbing detail. Know what though? In that moment, I knew something inside me had changed forever too. Later, after Amber bolted out of there like her life depended on it and we were cracking open the brewskis, Drake confessed something to me, mumbled it out real slow between pulls on his beer, like he could barely believe it even as he was saying it. Dude, I've never been so fucking turned on in my life. Watching her get all riled up like that, fuck, it was almost like she was performing just for me. Drake then went into pervy detail, fantasizing out loud about what it would be like to make freaky deaky with Sabrina, how he would willingly let her coil around his body and squeeze the breath out of him as they rutted like animals in heat. It was some of the nastiest shit I'd ever heard drool out of another human's mouth. But instead of being repulsed like a normal person, I felt something deep and primal stirring inside me, like an ancient spirit being awoken. Maybe the dude was onto something. From then on, I was around at Drake's place a lot more often, doing snake observation. Where he was oblivious to it at first, I started picking up on these subtle cues that Sabrina wasn't just some dumb cold-blooded automaton after all. The way she'd track our movements from inside her enclosure, slithering up into coiled striking position when either of us got near. Her powerful tail would occasionally strike out and thump the glass whenever we were talking, like she was demanding to be noticed and let out. And there was just no mistaking the way Sabrina reacted anytime a female was around Drake's apartment. Bless her full-bodied pits all out and putting off pheromone waves that seemed to physically reach inside the tank and agitate the serpent into frenzied excitement. Pretty soon, me and Drake were straight up fantasizing together about that big, scaly seductress, discussing increasingly depraved scenarios where she could coil around us while we pleasured ourselves or each other. We were becoming gradually obsessed. It went so far that we installed all these little webcams around Sabrina's tank in the hopes of catching her in the act, digging her bone protrusion into that soggy bedding she slept on at night, or pleasure squeezing one of her hunks of rodent prey. Doing anything to satiate this growing desire, we had to witness the snake in her most raw, unrestrained state. Demented as it sounds, it started turning into almost a brooding obsession for the both of us. Though we never got the kind of footage we were hoping for, we got to see some pretty messed up stuff regardless. Like one time we caught Sabrina in the middle of swallowing an entire newborn litter of live rabbits, snapping them up one by one as the mama thrashed around in futile distress. Watching her devour those fragile, squealing lives while their mama went mad with grief and rage. That was a level of dark, primal power that spoke to me in a way I never could have imagined before. It was like we'd cracked open Pandora's box, this gateway drug into the deepest psychological recesses of ecstasy and depravity, mind, body, and spirit. And behind that door we now straddled, we sensed Sabrina herself beckoning us in to join her on the other side, in that abyss, welcoming us to let our primitive humanoid urges take total control. There was no turning back though. We were physic addicts jonesing for that next fix, that next peek behind the curtain, which meant going bigger and more excessive every time, just to chase the same high. Which is how we finally wound up doing the unthinkable. It started one night when Emily hit us up desperate to score, even offering to make it worth our while if we could hook her up with some banger product. Now Emily was a notorious trick, sure, but she had disgusting utility burns and track marks all up her arms that even freaked us out a little. Made you really think about what this chick must have been up to, especially as a broke fiend. But she was all kinds of hot in a white trash, heroin chic sort of way too, So while she was waiting for Drake to go bag up for her, I pulled up that live cam feed from the snake tank, just to see what kind of show Sabrina was putting on for us. Dig? Things, they took a turn from there. Emily could hardly keep her strung-out eyes off the monitor once she clocked the raw, predatory way Sabrina was undulating and coiling around her enclosure, like she knew we were watching. Her tongue flick game was absolutely hypnotic that night too, almost like she recognized Emily and was purposely trying to weave a trance around her. Started working on us too. Before I even knew what was happening, my zipper was down and Emily slurping away on me like a fucking Hoover. Drake didn't waste any time climbing on board the train either. Next thing I know, we're full-on running a twisted train on Emily, slamming her from both ends while she drooled and babbled about the big snake she could see wrapped around our scrawny bodies in the monitor reflection. I ain't too proud to say we indulged in some real dark and drooling psychopathic fantasies as we used and abused that girl like a rag. Our entire vision had been corrupted. Emily was just a warm object for us to defile, a vessel to play out our most unhinged perversions upon. Sabrina would have been proud of the two animals she was shaping us into. That was just the beginning though. After that fateful night, me and Drake were like full-blown Eve partaking of the forbidden fruit, forever cursed with insatiable cravings that could never be quenched. Emily became our own personal stash that we'd call up to wage total unholy war upon whenever Sabrina started doing her bedroom hypnotrance again on the monitors. We'd film every filthy, illegal moment and add it to our growing collection, creating our own succubus snake snuff porn tapes to watch whenever we pleased. The worst part is how rapidly the vanilla stuff stopped working for us too. It didn't take long before we had to start exploring ever sicker and more degrading forms of subjugating our depraved muse Emily in ways that'd make a Tijuana donkey showgirl blush. Blunt objects, sharp instruments, household chemicals, hell, even some of the more exotic reptile accoutrements that Drake had laying around for Sabrina. Our minds were melting into the most twisted and profane of places, seduced by that ancient serpent of Eden itself whispering blasphemies into our souls, showing us that the ultimate earthly temptation had nothing to do with fruit or punishment, but embracing our absolute darkest, most uncivilized selves as uninhibited beasts. The cursed carnival. All right, listen up you little freaks. I'm about to lay some heavy shit on you that'll have you sleeping with the lights on for weeks. This messed up tale goes all the way back to when I was just a snotty little brat. Couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. See, my old man was a good-for-nothing drunk that took off before I could even walk, leaving me and my poor excuse for a mom all alone. Mama did what she could waitressing at that rundown dinner on Route 9, but it wasn't nearly enough. We were flat broke and living in a mobile home out in Bum Hickory that was one good kick away from being classified as a tetanus hazard. The one thing that made my life bearable as a kid, though, was when the carnival would roll into town for a couple weeks every summer. You know the kind of carny shows I'm talking about, the tawdry, skeezy ones run by biker gangs and freaks with more teeth knocked out than in, with the sketchy-ass rides that looked like Jurassic Park rejects, held together with rusted bent nails and torn duct tape. And don't even get me started on the game rings. You had a better chance of outwitting a carnival barker than digging a sphinx out of a cereal box. But to a naive little idiot like me, all those bright neon lights and clouds of fuzzy sugar made the carnival seem like a straight-up oasis in our rundown garbage town. I'd spend weeks counting down the days until those stunned big rigs would start rolling and loaded down with the tints, games, and rickety metal death traps. Finally get to blow what little cash me and Mama had scraped together on some dumb stuffed animals and corn dogs, just to feel normal for a few golden hours. Lord, was it worth every smacked-ass grifter scam along the way. Well, one year, a few days before that first semi was scheduled to rumble in, something downright abnormal started happening around town that has stuck with me to this very day. See, folks in Bum Hickory are no strangers to going groom meals missing, or even turning up dead in the quarry or meth shacks. It's just kind of an unspoken part of life in those parts. You get used to it and don't ask too many questions. What raised eyebrows everywhere, though, was the insane and wicked way these poor bastards were getting mutilated before croaking. One dude was found dangling upside down off the old Pine Creek Bridge by a sweater tied around his ankles, body slashed to wet ribbons like by some kind of wild animal. A few days later, another messed up victim showed up behind the Piggly Wiggly, somehow missing both arms all the way up to the shoulder blades with her blood completely drained out. I'm talking straight up exsanguinated, like existence was a bodily fluid to her that got crudely released. Then there was old Clem, the owner of our local liquor spot, who everyone knew packed a heater under his skeezy porno mags. One day the door to his shop got kicked down and the cops find nothing but a giant bottomless hole in the floor where Clem used to stand, burnt down all the way past the foundation and into the earth's core itself. Crazy, unexplainable stuff was happening so frequently that even the cemetery grounds crew got too spooked to keep burying bodies. The sheriff and some state troopers got called in to try and make heads or tails of this berserk situation, but it was like they were just spinning their tires in the Looney Tunes, just trying to figure it all out. By the time the carnies finally did roll into town with their big rig circus parade of degeneracy, the whole place was gripped by straight-up paranoia. Rumors were flying that it was the work of a satanic cult, or even a grisly serial slayer taking warm-up cuts before Skip Town massacre season. Being an ignorant little squirt at the time, though, I was too hyped about the carnival being back to pay any mind to the finer details behind why the place felt like a ghost town. Mama flat out refused to let me go at first, said not a chance until these sickos got what was coming to him. But then she caught wind of the safety inspectors giving their all clear after doing a round of basic bribery. So off we went to the garish, blinding cavalcade of pure ID, hormones, and high-fructose corn syrup that had rolled in like a depraved Pied Piper, leading us back into sin's loving, flypaper arms. Looking back on the state of that carnival now, I can't fathom how anyone with 2 brain cells could have possibly signed off on it being up to code. Half the rides looked like they should have been ground down for scrap in the Carter administration, with rusted girder tracks and U-bolts barely hanging on for dear life. The tents and stalls reeked of mold and were stained by decades of service truck smog and chain smoker spit. Even the normally greasy carny food looked and smelled like it was being cooked over the flames of the damned. A dark revelation as to what mystery meat actually comprised those corn dog membranes. But I was too much of a youngster to let such petty trifles harsh my summer-turned vibe. Me and Mama spent that night bouncing from game booth to knuckle-dragging freak show attraction like 2 sweet babes in the debauchery woods. I could almost imagine it actually being a regular slice of Americana, with the way the nickel and dime scams and flashing lights had me grinning from ear to ear. Even the sleaziest carnies running the quarter con seemed harmless and lovable in my idiot kid view. That was until I met him. The face that still provides the background for every fever nightmare I've woken up and sweating from ever since. We were walking past one of those curtain sideshows promising three-headed sharks and lizard men for admission when a toothless creep reached out from the shadows and grabbed my arm in a vice. "You there, boyo?" He wheezed in a voice like an aimless dust cloud. "Step right this way and see the real oddities we got in store. For a limited time only." When I turned around, I legitimately thought Satan himself had reached up and punched me square in the face. Bulging demonic eyes with singed red pupils as large as dimes bore out from a twisted ragdoll mask of scorched, peeling flesh hanging off its skull. Swollen talons extending from fingertips that looked like Day of the Dead tributes to the devil. This was the stuff even the hardest carnival barkers and human oddities avoid eye contact with at their own nomadic freak shows. And judging from the shrill wail Mama let out before scrambling with me in the opposite direction, she felt the same primal fear that I did. We hightailed it out of there so fast, I didn't have a chance to see if that demon mockery even had an actual attraction tent or was just lurking to spirit away young souls. For the rest of the night, though, no matter where we ran to or how hard we tried to forget about him, I could swear I felt those soulless red oven peepers piercing into the back of my mind. Even after the carnival packed up and hit the road the following week, that unsettling presence never truly left. It took up permanent residence within a deep, necrotic crevice that had been carved into my psyche, and it was patiently waiting there in the darkness to one day fully manifest itself again. Fast forward about 10 years later, and I'm now a smart-ass punk teenager with more issues than a magazine rack and a bad underage drinking habit. Mama passed away from cancer, leaving me to bounce around shitty foster homes and get hassled by rent-a-cop truants whenever I stopped going to school for months at a time. I was all kinds of jaded by that point, thinking I'd been through so much messed up stuff in life that nothing could possibly shock or rattle me anymore. Boy oh boy was I sadly mistaken. It happened one night while I was busy getting housed off a jug of Thunderbird with my sketchball crew down by the gravel quarry near the old drive-in. We were in the middle of railing Anonymous Batch when this rusted-out junkyard chariot comes coffin-diving toward us through the dust, stacking it hard against the rock ridge. My first stupid assumption was it was 5-0 snooping around for some quota busting. But when the creaky side doors squeaked open and I clocked the first occupants starting to step out, I felt that same suffocating fright I did a decade ago at the carnival. Dudes were straight nightmares plopped off the spit, their faces a mash of drooping scars, leather skin and open pus craters like a van full of walking guos from the ninth gate. Some had animal horns protruding from busted scalps and dangling entrails swinging out of gutted stomachs like busted cigarette boats. Others were just burnt-up skeletons barely clinging together, looking like they crawled up straight from the core of the earth itself. None of it seemed even remotely possible, yet there they were, closing in around us with a disturbing singular intent. Me and my buddies didn't even have a chance to run or scream or shit our pants before we knew what hit us. Those things descended, grabbing and snatching and stuffing us into burlap sacks like cats collecting up baby birds for dinner. We kicked and hollered, but nothing could pierce through that suffocating burlap. I still have no idea how far or for how long they ended up carting us off to wherever the hell we ended up. The only thing I knew was, somehow, that demon from the carnival had finally come back to collect his toll. When my bag finally got ripped off, all I saw was cavernous pitch-black darkness and felt my eyeballs nearly blown out by a putrid wall of funk so condensed, you could have sliced it up and served it over rice. From what I could make out, we were in some kind of underground chamber or bunker, with moist rotting beams of wood splaying out at odd angles and accented by torchlight, bathing everything in a sick crimson gloom. And arrayed around us in a complete circle of unholy terror were our carny abductors, now joined by an entire freak show congregation of limbs, torsos, and unidentifiable pustules, all knotted and pulsating together in a constant state of metamorphosis. Behold, An amplified demon bellow erupted around us, followed by a symphony of wet smacking and slurping that made my scrotum tremble with sheer revulsion. The grand rebirth of the accursed carnival of Gorthrok has once again arrived. Let the ceremonies commence. Before my mortal brain could even begin processing what sick cosmic rituals we'd been kidnapped to bear witness to, the sadistic festivities got underway with a vengeance. One of the carny mutants grabbed my buddy Greg by his shaggy pit, mane, and unleashed a torrent of barbed tentacles that lashed out from within its abdomen. Those whipping nightmares speared Greg in every hole possible,